This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
This is Father Jacob Bertrand Jancic.
And this is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. That introduction was interesting because I think everyone sensed that because there are 5 of us, we should conserve our energy, because usually you can be like, this is blah, 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 and this is blah, 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 and you can get pumped about it. But Father Patrick was like, I'm going to take the slow approach. And paradoxically enough, it was Father Jacob Bertrand who first sounded a note of excitement. So Father Jacob Bertrand, congratulations on being excited. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks. I'm usually not excited, so I don't know what's up. We'll see how long it lasts, but don't hold your breath.
All right, perfect. Well, there are 5 of us on this episode. Father Bonaventure, do you think there's an explanation for that? Can it be known?
It cannot be known. We don't know, and there's no way of knowing. That's my new. I think I was just telling Father Gregory about this with kids when they ask like why something is. You should say I don't know, but then you have to follow with, and there's no way of knowing, because then that stalls out any questions. Right? I've never heard anyone try this, but I think it's really I don't know. You know, why does rain fall in droplets? I don't know, and there's no way of knowing. You know, just imagine if we lived in a universe where that actually was. You just couldn't know a bunch of things. There's no way of knowing them. Not impossible.
Yes. Science just had real hard limits, and you were really honest with your, young audience
Epistemic
about
limitations.
That. Yeah, just devastating.
Oh my god.
So we're here all together for the first time, I think, since a Christmas episode, something like 3 years ago. Christmas, that's your department, Father Joseph Anthony. So how does this particular occasion compare to ordinary Christmas cheer?
It's a little different, but we're about 6 months apart from that, or a little less than. So I think it's
4.
It's appropriate.
It's 4 months.
It's the summer. I just equate the summer just generally halfway from December, but it's fine. It's a little different, a little more subdued. The late summer evenings of the recording versus the hype of pre-Christmas cheer. So I don't
You're
think
a Christmas birthday, aren't you?
To hear. Yeah, Christmas Eve, man. Right before, just hours before the Lord came into this world.
I would mention when Father Jacob Bertrand's birthday is, but he wouldn't like it. And
I was just annoyed that
down.
your birthday. I was just annoyed that his birthday was met. I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
No.
All personal details will henceforth be obscured. So welcome to Not Godsplaining, and we are not your hosts. In all seriousness, we're here because Father Patrick has a big announcement. He is going to tell us what this episode is about. Father Patrick, what's this episode about?
We're celebrating our 10th anniversary.
halfway to 10.
Halfway there, right?
Yay. We're really doing it. So 10 years ago, we had an idea, but unfortunately, that's not true. 6 years later, we did have an idea, and that idea was Godsplaining. So Father Patrick and I recorded an episode on apologetics, and then Father Patrick was like, that was terrible. We probably shouldn't post it. And I said, Father Patrick, what's the last thing we did that wasn't terrible? And he was like, great point. He's like, now it's time to post it.
He wore me down. I was all in favor of waiting to launch the project, but it turns out that the only way Godsplaining was going to get any better was if we just kept doing things.
Yeah,
exactly. And so here we are amidst a transformation from recording with 2 tin cans connected by a piece of string while seating our computers on top of garbage cans to technology which is slightly more advanced. So thanks. But we thought that we'd take the opportunity 4 years in to maybe reminisce a little bit and just thank God for the many gifts that he has given to us and then to the community that's grown up around the podcast. Because it's been a blessing in our lives and blessing in the lives of those whom we've come to know through it. So yeah, maybe let's start there. Just some favorite moments, whether it's favorite episodes or favorite retreats or favorite pilgrimages. There aren't all that many pilgrimages, so there's only one, and Father Jacob Bertrand is going to say that is not his favorite because it was pure pain and suffering. So maybe Father Bonaventure, get us started. A favorite of the last 4 years of Godsplaining.
Oh, there's a bunch. I think my favorite is originally, I'm sure I mentioned this before, our original production, which I can't I've been trying to find the original episodes, and I think they're gone. I mean, I don't check me if I'm wrong about this, but are they available on YouTube? Can you find the original ones if you type in like
Not-
Godsplaining on a can?
No, not on YouTube.
didn't-
We didn't start posting until like episode 43, and Father Patrick was like, "It seems like there's this other platform out there with which the youths are using to watch the
Wow.
sounds."
Because
Do you-
I
The sounds.
You
Yeah,
don't remember that
absolutely.
we didn't use YouTube for like the first like 8 months?
the
Yeah.
majority of
It was like COVID, right? COVID pushed us to start video and everything. I
what did
think.
we do?
Maybe.
Oh, it wasn't. Oh, right. Yeah. It wasn't.
mistake.
It was just SoundCloud, right? It didn't have a video.
Mhm.
Weird. Because I remember maybe that makes this more sense. It was more exciting to I guess this would have looked weird to when we gathered around flipped over trash cans and laptops. Now you wouldn't have noticed this if you were listening because you couldn't see it. Although we should have videotaped those episodes too, I suppose, with just the camera on the Mac. But those were great times, like sitting in a room huddled together over an upside down trash can and doing discussions about swearing or something, or I mean the early episodes. Which that was a joy. I have to say my favorite episode I have a sign on my door that tells the students when I'm recording so that they don't like barge in on me. And it is one of my favorite episodes, and it's Boats and Boating. Which was a
Yes.
summer classic from last year. I thought that was just a heck of a lot of fun. Everyone loved that except Father Gregory, but it was extremely enjoyable. So those are upside down trash cans and Boats and Boating were two, and then I think finally the other one is just the retreats in general. Being surprised at how diverse the audience is. And I remember our first retreat, we had Amazon workers and biology majors and PhDs and teachers and nurses, and so how diverse the people actually listen to the show is. It was great to not only meet people in person, and make connections, but also to realize that just a lot of people from different walks of life listening to the show, and I was gratified by that, since most of the things that people listen to me about are just super nerdy.
Bingo. Father Patrick, I believe that Boats and Boating was a source of contention as to whether or not boating was intrinsically evil on account of the fact that motors are used beyond sails. So I don't know if that for you is an especially traumatic experience or, a delightful one, but do you have favorite moments, favorite episodes, favorite things from the podcast?
Well, obviously we'll have another episode on Boats and Boating in the future. So I think Boats and Boating Part 2 is definitely what the people want for that discussion to continue. I've been doing some research, so that I'm more prepared for the conversation. What's my favorite moment? I mean, I loved when we were setting up the recording studio to be in person again for the first time together. So we were up there at Father Jacob Bertrand's place at Dartmouth, and we were putting trash bags over the windows and assembling our beloved Amazon bookcase and fighting the tree removal company that was
Right.
chainsawing down something on the property. I mean, that was all around just an extremely powerful experience. Yeah.
That was like my first act as pastor when I was walking around and like getting a tour of the property. There was a big dead oak tree and I was like, cut it down. Literally the first thing that I ordered, the first check that I signed was to cut that tree down. And they happened to come while we were trying to record.
Yeah.
You show up, you
That was-
curse the tree, and you're like, that thing's
Yeah.
coming down. We're done with it.
I think at one point in that recording session, I suggested that we put the USB bank with 3 cam links coming out of it on like a Ziploc
Ice.
bag filled with ice cubes.
Nice.
Yeah,
The
we
thing
were
was,
trying
like,
to cool
on
it down.
fire.
Oh, that's right.
We were
Everything
Yeah.
kept overheating.
Yeah. It's like, in hindsight, I don't know that Ziploc bag with ice cubes was ever a good idea. But it just goes to show, again, how far we've come. No longer are we introducing water into electronic systems because we know that it's bad. That development has been, okay. So, all right. The recording sessions have been quite the exciting venture, especially insofar as window units generally create noise, and noise is generally picked up by microphones. But the problem without window units, regardless of what time of year, is that when 3 men are huddled in a room that's like 7 by 7, that Father Jacob Bertrand gets increasingly happy about the temperature. So here's to the many smells of Godsplaining, which you, the listeners, are spared. Father Jacob Bertrand does not create smells. It's just me. All right. So Father Joseph Anthony, thoughts, favorite things, least favorite things, mostly favorite things.
some of the favorite things. when we finally got down to DC, like I agree with Father Patrick, like that first kind of recording session that we did, we're like, oh, we can do this. And then we really kind of upgraded all of our equipment and gear. Like that's the things that I love, is like all the tech side of it all. So like to move into a studio in DC to actually like set that up with everything, that was really just a lot of fun from my end. I think the other thing I really loved is when we started doing guest episodes. So I think Father Patrick and I were on like the first guest episode with Sarah Kroger. And that was just like a fun experience, because we were like, okay, how do we branch out into this new aspect of the podcast? And it really picked up and has become like a beautiful kind of aspect of the podcast. So I really loved that kind of first guest episode we did, and then what that has become over the last few years. And then I think the other thing is just, when you're traveling a lot, whether it's doing conferences or things like that, just finding the listeners in every place that we end up, getting a chance to meet them, especially on our retreats. But like Father Bonaventure was saying, just like looking at the diversity of all of our listeners, this past all comers retreat in Malvern, Pennsylvania was just a party. That was, I think, like top to bottom, like one of the best things we did. I think just watching each one of us get like super passionate and like be just firing on all cylinders. So that retreat, I think, was like watching everything kind of come together and watching all five of us just kind of hit our stride in it. And I loved that weekend. So yeah, a lot of really good stuff.
Imagine that good things would come from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and environs. You never thought it possible. Yep. This auto back battery brought to you by... Just kidding. All right, Father Jacob Bertrand, your thoughts. Godsplaining, are we going to keep going, or do we shut it down yesterday? Just kidding.
I thought we were talking about our favorite things, but yeah, I think we're going to keep going to answer the question. Gosh. Okay. No, we're going for sure.
Let's go.
Let's go.
I think two things. I'm going to take two things. I was going to do one, but other people did two, so I'm getting greedy too. Two things stand out. Okay, well, I'll do two. I'll be less greedy. One, actually, contrary to popular belief, especially if you tuned into the Camino episode or heard Father Gregory's comment about the Camino, it's been far enough along that I can say something positive about the Camino. No, I'm just kidding. There were a lot of good things about it, but I think one of my favorite memories of Godsplaining podcast world was, I don't know if it was our penultimate night or it was the night before we were walking into Compostela. We kind of gathered in as a group, sat outside. It was kind of rainy, I think, but we sat outside at the albergue where we were staying. And yeah, it kind of had an opportunity. I think this was your idea, Father Gregory, kind of just an opportunity for people to share and open up about their, whatever they want, kind of their experience, their faith, their whatever. And yeah, people said some beautiful things, but it was a moment to see in ways that the other guys here have reflected on sort of the impact that the podcast has had, and the charism of our order has had through the podcast, that the way by which our Lord works in people's lives. It was just a beautiful moment to kind of sit around, be together, reflect on that. That stands out. Another one is a little less like, I don't know, it's kind of more from what the back end side of things of our work, what's something that we've, I guess, has become accustomed that the five of us friars do before our retreats is the night before retreat starts. We take the opportunity to go out to dinner together. And we've lived with each other, certainly through formation, but since formation, a few of us have lived together in different iterations, but we're rarely together, the five of us, even though we work on the project together. But those dinners have been, I look forward to them a ton. They're a ton of fun, and it gets us excited for the retreat coming up, but it's just a good excuse and a good time for us to be together. And those things, I think it's just, the people that stick out to me. So, in more ways than I've just listed. So,
yeah. For my part, like a high and a low, both of which are memories that make me grateful for God's grace and the way in which it's been at work in the podcast and the relationships. is one, I remember there was this one time, it was probably about 2 years ago, where we were having problems with all of our recordings because there was something buggy about the software that we were using, and we kept losing episode after episode after episode. And all of us were just at our wits' end. And, you know, while we joke about it now, like back then it was a question like, will this continue, or are we all just going to throw our computers out the window and never think about, you know, online-based media again? And there was a guy who worked for the company, the software of which we were using, who hopped on calls with me over the course of 2 days and troubleshot the problem from start to finish. And it was like just a bro who was hanging out in Florida who knew a little bit about, you know, tech. And he's like, yeah, this is weird, dude. Like, I can't account for it, but we'll figure it out. Like, we'll figure it out. And I was like, we will figure it out. Yeah, because you say so, and you know things about computers that I don't. And I remember just feeling sad and lonely because it was like 16 hours into the troubleshoot, but also knowing that it was worth it, and that this dude was willing to see it through, and that, you know, eventually we resolved most of our tech problems. We recently had one, and it was strange for me because I was like, we haven't had a tech problem in a minute. Thanks be to God. And then the other one is just retreats in Globo. They've just been a high point for me. The first one, we were sitting around a table on Saturday night, and I was sitting at a table with a big squad of people who had all come from Texas. So like Lizzie and Raymond and Maddie and Alan and all these cool people who just descended on the retreat center where we were in Long Island. And one of them said, you know, like, what are your favorite things about being a priest? And I'm not too terribly given to, you know, protestations of emotion. But at that moment I was like, this is. And I was like, holy smokes, that was kind of squishy. But I think I meant it. And then this past men's retreat that Father Patrick and I just did, a big squad of awesome dudes showed up. And it was really cool because there were 7 or 8 men, like servicemen, who were either recently, you know, retired or still in active duty. So guys from the Army, guys from the Marines, guys from the Navy. And to see the camaraderie they had with each other, and then the way in which that camaraderie opened up to all the retreatants, and the way in which, like, it raised the tone and it imparted a new urgency to the teaching, to the preaching, to the kind of traveling together along the way of life's journey. And it was really precious. So those have been blessed. I'm super grateful for them. All right. So looking to the past, we find lots of gems and lots of really wonderful memories and things that sustain us in the present. But we're also, you know, looking to the future in a certain sense. So maybe we can just reflect a bit about, like, what is Godsplaining, and I don't know, where does it fit in your own priesthood and religious life? Father Bonaventure right now is thinking, I hope it doesn't, because just as soon as you can let me leave this podcast, I will take the opportunity. But, you know, we said at the outset, Godsplaining is this or Godsplaining is that. And we had our kind of jingle, or we had our mantra, which I made super complicated and multisyllabic. And Father Patrick was like, simpler, simpler, simpler. But yeah, what is Godsplaining to you, or what does Godsplaining become to you? Father Patrick, you want to start us up?
Yeah, I think the thing that I appreciate is that we've found a kind of niche as far as Dominican projects go. I mean, it was important for us that we had that we created a voice that people have recognized has helped them to appreciate the order. And for me, that was what was really important, is that people would see something of St. Dominic's project come to life in their lives, and that would make a difference in the way that they pray, in the way that they live their faith, and in the way that they study it. And I've seen that over and over again. So that I would say that's one thing that I've come to really delight in, and not something that I knew was going to be possible necessarily from the outset.
Father Jacob Bertrand, this is something that you think and clarify in conversations with other folks, whether in retreats or beyond, quite a bit. So I don't know, Godsplaining, what is it to you, or what does it become?
Yeah, in some ways, I think, like all projects, it has become sort of, I don't know if it, well, I'll say it this way. I don't know if it's become what I would have expected it to become 4 years ago. It's kind of taken on a life of its own, and it's, as projects do, you know, it's driven by us, our ideas, the people that have helped with the project, that sort of thing. But it's certainly, what would I say? At the outset, I did not think it would have shaped my priesthood as much as it has. I've been a priest. It was 5 years in May, and we've been doing Godsplaining for 4 years. So that's more than half, Father Joseph Anthony, if you're keeping track of the numbers again. You know, so it's been a significant part of my priesthood, and it shaped the way that I preach, and it shaped the way that I approach the gospel and meditate upon the gospel. It's approached the way that I see the Lord's work at work. And I don't think that's going to end, so I imagine it'll continue to challenge me in my priesthood and in my preaching and in my, ability to be like a good Dominican and a good brother. So that's not like here's a future plan, but it's certainly something that's active and alive. And I don't think that reality is going to change. It's really been part and parcel to my priesthood. And it's a blessing for sure.
Yeah. Father Joseph Anthony, another wonderful Godsplaining moment was at Seek this past year when we recorded an episode. And there was a big squad of your students who were there in manifest support. And that was really cool for me to see just how much they love you and how much they were there for you in recognition of how much you were there for them. So I don't know if you have thoughts too about, Godsplaining and your own priesthood and your service of the students at your campus.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I'm recording now in my office here at the parish center, and when I meet with students and we're talking about anything else, whether it's student leadership things or they're working through their faith and growing in their faith, and they see the studio set up, they're like, their eyes light up and they're like, oh, that's where you record. Like I've seen that. I know that place. And to kind of like in a real sense, draw them into it and to help utilize this platform, this podcast as a continuation of helping them to grow has been really, it's been a great asset and a great continuation of what I'm kind of like doing on a day-to-day with them, but also not as a totally separate thing. Right, to be able to kind of integrate my real work as a chaplain with them into this project has been really helpful. And I think the other thing for me that this project in this podcast really allows for us is what was almost at the heart of it in its genesis. I remember earlier this spring, Father Patrick and I went to a conference in Providence College to talk about the podcast and how it started. And we were able to talk about the fact that this was like a fruit of our friendship together. And that's one of the things that I continually hear when we meet people on retreats, when we meet them at other conferences or, in airports and things like that. But they always talk about how enjoyable it is to see our fraternity amongst each other. And I think that was something that we really wanted to kind of invite people into, and not necessarily a quote unquote advertise, but like we were unafraid to put that on display. The fact that we are brothers together, real friends together. And I think that has actually continued to be that. So when I think about this project and when I think about this podcast and you say Godsplaining is, I think for me, it's a work of our fraternity together as brothers. And it's helped me to kind of really stay in touch with all of you guys from being kind of on the outskirts of the province. But it's given me a reason to continually to collaborate with you guys, to be invested and to work together. So for me, it's definitely a byproduct or a fruit of our fraternity together. And I think that's really, really important. That's what kind of keeps me engaged, keeps me invested in this entire thing. I remember on the early days when things were rough in a lot of ways, you guys were able to pick up the slack for me. And that meant a tremendous amount and helped me continue on through that. So that's been a great gift that this podcast has provided for me.
Boom. That's awesome. Yeah, and for those who don't know, Father Joseph Anthony is the most technically competent when it comes to audio and video. And so every good and perfect gift of audio and video comes down from the Father of Lights, assuredly so, but has been mediated by the instrumentality of Father Joseph Anthony Kress. Every defect that's been introduced to it is, we can't figure it out. So
we're working on it. We're working on it, I swear.
All right, Father Bonaventure. Actually, apropos of one of the last things that you said, Father Joseph Anthony, like the friendship. It's funny. Sometimes I'll go on YouTube Studio to deal with something on the back end of the podcast, and to see how polarizing the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of each episode is hilarious to me. Because some people are like, I literally listened to this podcast for the chit chat at the beginning. Keep crushing it, guys. And then other people are like, the real convo begins at 4:06 with a timestamp and a hyperlink.
Skip through, just move through.
Well, for those people, they're not going to want to listen to this episode at all.
Yeah,
so fast
my
forward.
friends.
Oh my gosh.
Bless them.
combo.
You can skip this whole episode. We told you too late. All right, Father Bonaventure. Insofar as we inhabit a world in which very few things matter at all, and Godsplaining probably matters the least. If it were to matter theoretically, hypothetically, what would that look like?
Yeah, I can't believe we're still doing this. But I mean, when we got started, I remember thinking like, yeah, this is great. It'd be cool to keep in touch with guys because I'm one of those people. If you're not in like eye shot of me, I'm just not very good at keeping up with people. So this was like a forced project of community. So that's great for me. And it was initially like, let's just put a microphone in front of Dominicans talking to each other over stuff. And because we say interesting things, or at least we can be funny. And I love that aspect of it. But it kind of morphed into like a thing that served the church in some fashion. And I think I want to pick up on Father Patrick's call. What it's meant to me is a fulfilling of Dominican vocation, Dominican style of preaching in the 21st century. We entered novitiate under our first prior. Well, our first prior for most of the year was Father Basil Cole, and one of our veterans here. And he did a lot of time on the preaching bands, which was like itinerant preaching in California. And this was an important part to Dominican ministry, was going out and preaching to the folk. And it's not something that is immediately inclined. I'm not immediately inclined to by any stretch of imagination. I wouldn't do it. And yet Godsplaining, I think, is a version of this itineracy in the 21st century. This is whatever this web thing is the frontier of social communication and blah, 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 and Marshall McLuhan. Who cares? And the Dominican, this is what Godsplaining to me is, at least, is something of trying to build out St. Dominic's, Holy Father Dominic's charism to go to people and to preach the truth and to be out in the open that people can find the truth. This is a bit like Father Vince McNabb in the early 20th century, a great Dominican, who would go to the Hyde Park and stand on a soapbox and just preach for anyone to come. Anyone wanted to hear him. If someone was there, great. If no one was there, great. If there were hecklers, great. If there weren't hecklers, not. In some ways, that's what the comm box is all about. And there's some episodes that no one listens to, and that's fine. There were some days when no one came out, and it was just wet in England. And there are other days where lots of people were there. So that's kind of our version there. So it's the Godsplaining to me is an outworking, I think, of the Dominican charism. And it's a reminder to me that that's an important part of my life as a Dominican, even though I'm not inclined towards it. And it's at least a checkbox that I can, or at least something I can show to Holy Father Dominic, ideally at some point when I meet him, and he's asking me what I've done for souls outside of the academy. And this would be something.
There's a collection of stories about the early order called the Vitae Fratrum, which just means the lives of the brethren. And it's kind of like the Little Flowers of St. Francis Assisi, except that book is awesome and our book is kind of boring, but that's okay. You got to know how interesting you are, and sometimes you're not that interesting. But the first couple of stories are about the Blessed Virgin Mary beseeching our Lord Jesus Christ to institute an order dedicated to her for preaching, specifically for preaching to bring back those who have erred. And so it sets the tone that the Dominican order is founded at the special request of the Blessed Virgin Mary so as to call back those who are lost. And it's interesting when you look back at our past episodes, we only go so long before we bounce back to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I was thinking about this when Father Bonaventure, you and I were setting an episode title or an episode topic for the live stream for August 15th. It's the Feast of the Assumption. I mean, what are you going to do? It's going to be the Blessed Virgin Mary. I mean, you can't not make it the Blessed Virgin Mary. I don't know how many negatives I introduced to that sentence, but you can't not, otherwise shouldn't not make it the Blessed Virgin Mary. But that's been the MO. And I think that that's like her maternal intercession is in large part operative or at work in, like our friendships and in our relationships. And it kind of introduces a certain sweetness to it, or a certain simplicity to it, which I think is nice, because it's good to have magnanimous plans, but also the 21st century is somewhat overwhelming and dark and scary. And when you set off into the dark, scary 21st century, you have to have friends, or otherwise you're not going to get anywhere, because you're just going to be cowering in fear in the corner of your home, lest you cross the threshold and meet whatever's out there. Sea monsters, as Father Bonaventure once recounted in our Novitiate Chronicle about a great preacher of the order. So we're grateful also to the Blessed Virgin Mary and her intercession insofar as she's at work, in our relationships, but also at work in the hearers and the listeners to the podcast to intercede on their behalf and open them to the Word of God, which is living and effective, which is sharper than any two-edged sword, which pierces between joints and marrow, soul and spirit, and is able to discern reflections and thoughts of the heart. So God be praised.
Good.
And
who said that?
What's that?
That's good.
Yeah,
Who said that?
Some people say St. Paul. Others people say that's a false attribution, but we'll work it out in the end. All right, so coming to the end here. Any final thoughts? We'll give the mic to Father Jacob Bertrand. Final thoughts or wrap-up thought?
Gosh, I wasn't expecting that. I had planned the other things that I was going to say. Final thoughts. Yeah, one final thought. I think too, one of just you just mentioned gratitude. Grateful for the people and that bro from Florida. Also grateful for the people who have worked hard behind the scenes to help, because it's not just been the five of us. There have been some pretty steady contributors, and I think if we were to mention them by name, they wouldn't be too pleased to have their name mentioned. So all the same, we've been well supported, and I'm grateful for that, for the people who have also invested and been excited about Godsplaining and making it a wee bit better over the years. So thanks for that.
Yeah. And Father Patrick, bring us home with any final commendation.
Yeah, I think it's great to see the ways that the podcast continues to influence other activities in the order. I mean, we're looking forward to the Rosary pilgrimage coming up here on September 30th, where the most famous Catholic priest in America, Father Gregory Pine, is going to be preaching, which I am super pumped about. Thank you for saying yes to that, Father Gregory. That's going to be a great day. And I think that there are a lot of people who are connected to the order, who love the order, who love the Rosary, who love the Virgin Mary, that are going to turn out. And that will be a great day of renewal and a great day of encouragement for the Church.
Yeah. So in these next couple of years, we're looking forward to Eucharistic renewal and Marian consecration, and certainly that event, the Dominican Rosary pilgrimage, to take place on September 30th in here, Washington, D.C. In here. It's like, oh gosh, never mind. Keep going, Gregory. Here in Washington, D.C. at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. So we're looking forward to sharing that day with you, and a couple of us will be around to meet you, to chat with you, to pray with you, and together to be encouraged by the prayers of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So you can find more information about that at rosarypilgrimage.org. And there have been a couple of features about it on various media outlets. So you can check up there if you want further details. But basically, it's going to be just a wonderful day of recollection with Marian devotion peppered throughout. So look forward to it. And it's going to be great. All right. Thanks as always for listening to Godsplaining. Please follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. From what I understand, our TikTok account has lapsed, but maybe we'll bring it back because Father Bonaventure is such a fan of TikTok. Look forward to his choreographed TikTok dances in future episodes. Like the episode, subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app, and leave a 5-star review, unless it's possible to leave more stars, because we'll always take more stars. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, follow the link in the description or show notes. And again, a word of thanks to those who have supported us through Patreon throughout the course of the podcast history. And we've been able, just in the past couple of months, to subsidize some retreats and make it easier for people who might not otherwise be able to attend. And that's just been a blessing in their lives. In those descriptions and or show notes, you'll find links to shop merchandise and to get information for upcoming Godsplaining events. And certainly that young adult retreat in November being one that we're most excited for. And then the Dominican Rosary pilgrimage. All right. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us. And we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.